Ridwanat Lawal ran without knowing where the road would end. Her bare feet burned against the dirt, one hand gripping her swollen belly as if it were the only thing anchoring her to life. Behind her, the village had decided her fate. Immoral girl, she brought shame to us all. A stone flew past her ear. Another struck her arm. She staggered but forced herself forward because falling meant surrender, and surrender meant losing the child growing inside her. The path stopped at a towering iron gate, rusted and overgrown, an abandoned mansion, a place whispered about in Fear Not Mercy. With no strength left to beg and no home left to return to, Ridwanat pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The silence swallowed her whole. Then from the darkness, a man's voice spoke, steady, distant, and hollow. "Who are you, and why did you come here?" The gate slammed shut behind her. If this opening already touched you, tell me how you feel in the comments.
What country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if you want to follow this story to the very end, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Ridwanat Lawal had not always been a girl people pointed at in disgust. There was a time when her name was spoken gently in the narrow compound where she grew up. A time when neighbors praised her manners and elders nodded approvingly when she passed. She was the quiet one, the obedient one, the girl who woke before dawn to sweep the yard, who fetched water without complaint, who whispered prayers even when no one was watching. Her father had died when she was 13. A sudden illness, no warning, no time for goodbye. From that day on, the weight of survival settled heavily on her shoulders. Her mother, Aisha Lawal, tried to be strong, but strength was difficult when grief and poverty shared the same small room. Ridwanat learned early that dreams were luxuries meant to be folded away neatly, like clothes saved for celebrations that never came. Still, she dreamed. She wanted to become a nurse, not for prestige, not for money, but because she knew what it felt like to watch someone you loved fade without help. She studied whenever she could by candlelight on borrowed notebooks with pages already worn thin by other hands. Teachers noticed her intelligence. Some even whispered that she could go far if life allowed it. Life, however, had other plans. Pastor Elijah Ogunlai arrived in the village during a season of uncertainty. The rains had failed. Prices were rising and people were desperate for reassurance. He spoke with confidence, his voice smooth and commanding. He preached about forgiveness, about salvation, about how God favored obedience and punished rebellion. People listened. People believed. Ridwanat believed too. When her father's absence began to ache more sharply, when fear about the future wrapped around her chest like a tightening rope, she went to him for guidance. She trusted him because everyone did, because he wore righteousness like a well-tailored garment, because no one warned her that power often hides behind holy words. What happened between them was never violent. That was what made it harder to explain. It was manipulation disguised as care, authority masked as concern. When it was over, Ridwanat carried shame she did not yet understand and guilt that did not belong to her. Weeks passed, then months. Her body began to change. At first she told herself it was stress, hunger, exhaustion. But denial crumbled the morning she woke up nauseous, her hands trembling as realization settled into her bones. She stared at her reflection for a long time, searching for a girl who still had choices. She found none. When she told Pastor Elijah, his kindness vanished. His eyes hardened, his voice lowered. "You must be confused," he said. "Be careful what you say. Lies can destroy lives." From that moment, she was alone. The village noticed before she could hide it. Whispers followed her steps. Women stopped greeting her. Men looked away too quickly or stared too long. When her belly could no longer be concealed, the whispers became accusations. A meeting was called. Ridwanat stood in the center of the compound, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly over the small curve of her stomach. The elders spoke. The women murmured. Pastor Elijah prayed loudly, asking for purity and truth, never once meeting her eyes. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. Who is responsible for this child? Silence swallowed her answer before it reached anyone's ears. She could have spoken his name. She knew that. She felt it burning on her tongue. But she also knew the truth would not save her. It would only be twisted, buried, denied, and she was already tired of fighting battles she could not win. Her mother did not defend her. Aisha Lawal stood there, her face, rigid eyes glassy with fear. Not for her daughter, but for herself, for what people would say, for how they would look at her in the market, for the quiet shame that would stain their family name. It was Ridwanat's Aunt Moreniki Lawal who spoke the final words. "She cannot stay here," she said sharply. "We will not raise a child born of disgrace." No one argued. That night Ridwanat packed what little she owned into a small bag. A dress, a scarf, a pair of worn sandals she did not even have time to put on. Her mother watched from the doorway, lips pressed together, hands shaking. She did not say goodbye. Ridwanat waited for one last word, one sign, one reason to stay. None came. By the time she reached the edge of the village, the sun had dipped low and anger had replaced shame. Someone shouted first. Another followed. Stones appeared in hands that once offered greetings. The crowd grew quickly, feeding on itself, fueled by judgment and fear. That was when she ran. Her breath burned, her legs screamed. Her mind went blank except for one thought. Protect the child. Whatever happened to her no longer mattered as much as what happened next. And then the road ended. The mansion loomed like a forgotten scar on the land iron gates wrapped in vines, walls darkened by time and neglect. Children told stories about it. Adults avoided it. No one claimed ownership, yet no one dared trespass. Ridwanat had no strength left to fear rumors. She pushed the gate open and stepped inside, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might betray her hiding place. Now standing within those cold walls with the echo of a stranger's voice still lingering in the air, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back, because for the first time since the village turned against her, someone had not shouted, someone had asked a question. And sometimes a question was the beginning of everything. Ridwanat stood frozen just inside the threshold, her chest rising and falling too fast, her ears still ringing with the echo of the gate slamming shut. The air inside the mansion felt different, cooler, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. She could not see the man who had spoken. Only his voice lingered low and controlled, stripped of curiosity but edged with warning. "I asked you a question," he said. Ridwanat swallowed. Her throat was dry, her tongue clumsy with fear. "My name is Ridwanat Lawal," she said softly. "I didn't come to steal. I only needed somewhere to hide." Silence followed, not the kind that forgot you were there, but the kind that measured you. Then footsteps sounded from deeper within the mansion, slow, deliberate, unhurried. A shadow moved across the corridor, lengthening and shrinking with each step. When the man finally emerged into the faint light filtering through cracked windows, Ridwanat instinctively took a step back. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in a dark shirt and trousers that looked expensive without trying to be. His face was unreadable, strong features carved into stillness, eyes sharp, but distant like someone who had trained himself not to feel. This was Adewale Akinwale. Ridwanat did not know his name. She did not know that the man standing before her owned ports warehouses, fleets of trucks that crossed the country every day. She only saw a stranger who looked at her as if she were a problem he had not planned for. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," she replied quickly. "I'll leave at first light, I promise." Adewale's gaze dropped briefly to her bare feet, then to her stomach. Something flickered across his face, too fast to identify gone, before she could hold on to it. "This house is not abandoned," he said, "and it is not a shelter." Ridwanat nodded. "I understand." She waited for him to open the gate, to call the people outside, to send her back into the night. Instead, he turned and walked away. "You can stay until morning," he said over his shoulder. "One night. That's all." Relief nearly knocked her to the ground. He showed her a small guest room near the back of the house. The bed was neatly made but unused, the air faintly scented with dust and something older memories, perhaps. He placed a blanket on the bed, without meeting her eyes. "There are rules," he said. She straightened immediately. "Yes, sir. You don't wander. You don't open closed doors. You don't touch what doesn't belong to you." His voice hardened. "And you leave at sunrise." Ridwanat nodded again, grateful for any condition that did not end with her being thrown out. When he left, closing the door behind him, she finally allowed herself to sit. Her legs trembled violently. Only then did she realize how much she had been holding herself together with sheer will. She pressed both hands over her belly, breathing slowly, whispering words she had spoken many times before. "We are safe, just for tonight." Sleep did not come easily. The mansion creaked and sighed, settling into itself like an old body. Every sound made her flinch. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man lived alone in such a place and why he had let her stay at all. At some point, exhaustion claimed her. She dreamed of water and open roads, of voices, calling her name from places she could not reach. When she woke, pale light filtered through the curtains. Morning. Her heart sank. She sat up slowly, bracing herself for the pain in her lower back, for the fear that always accompanied waking now. Everything felt quiet. No shouting, no footsteps outside her door. She rose, smoothing her dress, and stepped into the corridor. The mansion was vast, too vast for one man. Sunlight cut through high windows, illuminating portraits draped in white cloth furniture, arranged carefully but untouched. It was not neglect she sensed, but abandonment chosen deliberate. She heard movement from the kitchen. Adewale stood by the counter, pouring water into a kettle. He did not look surprised to see her. "There's bread," he said. "Eat before you go." The simple kindness caught her off guard. "Thank you," she whispered. She ate quietly, painfully aware of every sound she made. Adewale watched her from the corner of his eye, saying nothing, his posture rigid as though allowing himself to be in the same room as her required effort. When she finished, she stood clutching the edge of the table. "I'll leave now," she said, "before anyone comes looking." Adewale's jaw tightened. "No one knows you're here," he said. Ridwanat hesitated. "They will." For the first time he looked directly at her. Who, he asked. Her instinct was to protect herself by staying silent, but something in his tone, flat, not accusing, made her answer. "My village." "That's not an answer." She drew in a breath. "Everyone." Adewale studied her for a long moment, as though deciding how much he cared. "You can stay another day," he said finally, "but after that you leave." Her eyes widened. "I don't want to trouble you." "You already have," he replied calmly. "One more day changes nothing." It changed everything. That afternoon, Ridwanat insisted on helping. She swept without being asked, cleaned dishes, folded a blanket that had not been touched in years. It was not gratitude, it was survival. She knew how quickly kindness could be withdrawn. Adewale pretended not to notice. Yet he did. He noticed how she moved carefully, protecting her body, how she flinched at sudden sounds, how she murmured apologies even when nothing was wrong. He noticed the discipline in her silence, the dignity she carried despite everything stripped from her. By evening, her face had grown pale. She tried to hide it, but when she bent to lift a small bucket of water, pain surged through her abdomen. A sharp gasp escaped her before she could stop it. Adewale was at her side in an instant. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "It will pass." He did not believe her. "Sit," he said firmly. She obeyed. The pain eased slowly, leaving fear in its wake. Ridwanat pressed a hand to her stomach, her eyes glassy. "I can't lose this child," she whispered, forgetting for a moment who she was speaking to. Adewale froze. The words hit something buried deep within him, something he had spent years sealing off. He straightened, stepping back as though the air between them had turned dangerous. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we'll see." That night, as Ridwanat slept more deeply than she had in weeks, Adewale stood alone in the darkened corridor staring at a closed door he had not opened in years. He had told himself he was done with responsibility, with attachment, with pain. And yet, against his will, a girl carrying a fragile life had crossed his threshold, and something he thought was long dead had stirred. Morning, he knew, would demand a decision. The mansion woke slowly, as if it resisted the idea of morning. Ridwanat opened her eyes to unfamiliar quiet, not the anxious stillness of hiding, but a calm that felt almost unreal. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in fragments. The iron gate, the man's guarded eyes, the rules spoken like boundaries carved in stone. She sat up carefully, waiting for pain. Her body responded with a dull ache, manageable, but enough to remind her that every movement now carried consequences. Outside her room, the house breathed soft footsteps, the distant clink of metal, the low hum of something electrical. Adewale was awake. She folded the blanket neatly before stepping into the corridor. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. The mansion was not truly abandoned. It was preserved almost reverently, as though time itself had been asked to stop at a certain moment and never move again. Ridwanat moved quietly, mindful of the rules. She did not wander far, but the urge to make herself useful tugged at her. Help had always been her currency, invisibility, her armor. In the kitchen, Adewale stood with his back to her, sleeves rolled just past his wrists as he prepared tea. He acknowledged her presence without turning. "You should rest," he said. "I slept," she replied. "I can help." He finally looked at her, his gaze sharp. "You don't owe me anything." She lowered her eyes. "I know, but doing nothing makes my mind loud." Something about the way she said it, quiet, honest, made him nod once. "Fine," he said, "but nothing heavy." She smiled faintly, the expression fleeting, as though she didn't quite trust it herself. As the day unfolded, Ridwanat cleaned what little needed cleaning. The house was already immaculate, but she wiped surfaces anyway, straightened curtains, arranged cushions that no one sat on. It gave her hands something to do, her thoughts somewhere to rest. Adewale watched from a distance, pretending not to notice. He told himself he was only being cautious. A stranger in his space required observation. But it was more than that. He noticed how she paused when her back tightened, how she breathed through discomfort instead of complaining. He noticed the gentleness with which she touched objects as though afraid of leaving marks. He noticed how she spoke softly to herself when she thought she was alone. At midday, the sun grew warmer, pressing against the windows. Ridwanat stood by one of them, staring out at the overgrown garden. "It must have been beautiful," she said quietly. Adewale followed her gaze. Once it had been. Roses trimmed weakly, paths swept clean, laughter echoing from the terrace. "It doesn't matter anymore," he replied. She nodded, but something in her expression suggested disagreement. Later, while preparing a simple meal, Ridwanat felt the pain return stronger. this time sharper, stealing her breath without warning. She gripped the edge of the counter, her vision narrowing. A bowl slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. Adewale was beside her instantly. "What happened?" he demanded. "I'm fine," she said too quickly, swaying. He caught her arm steady but careful, as though afraid of hurting her. "You're not fine," he said. She tried to straighten to reclaim control, but another wave of pain rolled through her. A soft cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. Adewale guided her to a chair. "Sit," he said. This time it was not a request. Ridwanat sat, tears gathering in her eyes, not from pain alone, but from fear. Fear that her body would fail her. Fear that she would lose the only thing she still believed in. "I've been careful," she whispered. "I really have." Adewale crouched in front of her, his face tight with concern he did not want to acknowledge. "How far along are you?" She hesitated. "Almost 5 months." He nodded, absorbing the information like data, though it was anything but impersonal. "Does this happen often?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "When I walk too much or lift things." He exhaled slowly, then stood. "You're done working today. You're done." He repeated more gently this time. He brought her water, watched as she sipped it slowly, her hands trembling. The pain eased, leaving behind exhaustion. As she rested, Adewale retreated to the far end of the room, leaning against the wall. He stared at nothing, his thoughts dragging him somewhere he did not want to go. He remembered a hospital room filled with machines, a doctor speaking in careful tones, a small hand he had never been allowed to hold. He had promised himself, never again. Ridwanat broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she said, "for causing trouble." Adewale closed his eyes briefly. "You didn't cause this," he said. She looked at him surprised. "No one has said that to me before." The admission landed heavily between them. That evening, the mansion felt different. Not warmer, Adewale would never allow himself that word, but less empty. He cooked dinner himself, a simple dish, and insisted she eat. When she tried to refuse, he shot her a look that ended the argument. "You need strength," he said. "Both of you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Ridwanat noticed. She said nothing, but something settled quietly in her chest. After dinner, Adewale showed her a room closer to his own. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said. "It's nearer." She understood what he did not say, that if something went wrong, he wanted to know. As night fell, Ridwanat lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the house. For the first time in weeks, she was not afraid of the dark. Down the hall, Adewale stood before a closed door. He had not opened it in years. Inside were photographs, memories, a life he had buried because surviving it felt easier than remembering. He reached for the handle, then stopped. Not yet, he told himself, but the walls had shifted. Because in the quiet presence of a girl who carried life despite rejection, something inside him had begun to crack, not loudly. Not all at once, but enough to let pain and something dangerously close to hope seep through. And hope, he knew, was far more frightening than despair. Night settled fully over the mansion, wrapping it in a silence so deep it felt intentional, as if the walls themselves were guarding secrets too fragile to be exposed. Ridwanat lay on her side, one hand resting lightly over her belly, the other tucked beneath her cheek. Sleep came in fragments, thin, easily broken, but it came nonetheless. She woke to a soft sound she could not immediately place. Voices, low, careful. For a moment, fear surged through her. Her body tensed, instinctively protective. She sat up slowly, listening. The voices faded, replaced by the steady hum of the generator somewhere outside. She realized then that she was alone again. Restless, she rose and stepped into the corridor, careful to stay within the boundaries Adewale had set. The house was dimly lit, shadows stretching along the walls like memories that refused to fade. As she passed the living room, she saw a faint light coming from the kitchen. Adewale sat at the table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of him. Papers lay scattered nearby, documents perhaps, or letters. His posture was rigid, his expression distant. "I'm sorry," Ridwanat said softly, stopping at the doorway. "I didn't mean to intrude." He looked up startled, as though he had forgotten she was there. "It's late," he said. "You should be resting." "I couldn't sleep," she replied. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit, then." She hesitated, then obeyed. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was different from before, not sharp, not hostile, but waiting. Ridwanat broke it. "You never asked," she said quietly. "Asked what about the child?" Adewale's jaw tightened. "If you want to tell me, you can. If not, you don't owe me explanations." She nodded, absorbing the permission. Her fingers traced small unconscious circles on the table's surface. "I didn't plan this," she began. "I didn't even understand what was happening until it was already too late." She swallowed. "He told me it was my fault, that I misunderstood kindness for something else." Adewale said nothing. "When I realized I was pregnant, I thought maybe he would help me. Maybe he would take responsibility." Her voice trembled. "He said I was lying, that I wanted to ruin him." Adewale's eyes darkened. "And the village?" he asked. "They believed him," she replied simply. "They always do." The words carried no bitterness, just exhaustion. She looked up at him, then her gaze steady but vulnerable. "Sometimes I wonder if my child would be better off without me," she admitted. "If being born into this shame is already a punishment." Adewale's breath caught. "No," he said sharply, surprising both of them. Ridwanat blinked. "That's not true," he added, more controlled. "No child deserves punishment for existing." She studied his face, sensing the weight behind his words. "Do you have children?" she asked gently. The question hung between them like a fragile thread. Adewale leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I did," he said. Ridwanat's heart stilled. "My wife and son," he continued. "We were driving back from the city. A truck lost control. Everything after that is noise." He fell silent. Ridwanat did not push. She knew too well how pain recoiled from pressure. "I stopped believing in fairness that day," Adewale said at last. "In goodness, in reasons." She listened, her chest aching with empathy. "When I see you," he went on, "I don't see weakness. I see someone carrying life despite everything trying to crush it." Tears welled in her eyes unbidden. "No one has ever described me like that," she whispered. Adewale stood abruptly, as though the intimacy of the moment had grown too heavy. "You should sleep," he said again, his voice softer now. As Ridwanat turned to leave, she paused. If you were my child," she said, her back still to him, "would you hate me?" The question was barely audible. Adewale closed his eyes. "No," he said. "I would protect you." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, and returned to her room. Long after she slept, Adewale remained at the table, staring at nothing. He thought of promises broken by fate, of love he had buried to survive, of the strange way a girl he barely knew had forced open doors he had sealed shut. Morning arrived quietly. Ridwanat woke feeling lighter, though her body still ached. She moved slowly, careful not to strain herself. In the kitchen, Adewale had already prepared breakfast. "You'll eat," he said, handing her a plate before she could protest. She smiled faintly and obeyed. Later that day, while Ridwanat rested on the veranda, Adewale made a call he had avoided for years. His voice was low, controlled, but resolute. "I need information," he said, "about a man named Pastor Elijah Ogunle." There was a pause on the other end. "Yes," he continued, quietly. He ended the call and stared out at the overgrown grounds. Ridwanat watched him from a distance, unaware of the shift taking place behind his calm exterior. She only knew that for the first time since she had been cast out, she felt something dangerously unfamiliar. Safe. As evening approached, a gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and leaves through the open windows. Ridwanat stood in the doorway, watching Adewale move through the house with purpose. "Thank you," she said suddenly. He stopped. "For letting me stay," she continued. "For listening." He nodded once. "This is temporary." "I know," she said, "but it matters." As night fell again, both of them lay awake in separate rooms, haunted by thoughts they could no longer ignore. Ridwanat wondered what kind of future awaited her child, whether it would know love or only survival. Adewale wondered when protecting someone else had begun to feel like saving himself. Neither knew that the quiet they clung to was already being threatened, that forces beyond the mansion's gates were shifting, searching, closing in. And when they arrived, silence would no longer be enough. The truth about Adewale Akinwale did not arrive with drama. It slipped into the room quietly, the way all dangerous truths did, through small, undeniable details. Ridwanat noticed them first. The cars that came and went beyond the iron gate were never old. Men in pressed shirts arrived occasionally, never entering the house, never raising their voices. They spoke to Adewale with a respect that bordered on caution. When he answered the phone, his tone changed, short, precise, unmistakably authoritative. This was not the voice of a man hiding from the world. It was the voice of someone who had once commanded it. Still, he lived like a ghost. Ridwanat watched him from a distance, puzzled by the contradictions. The mansion had power 24 hours a day. Fresh food appeared regularly without explanation. Medical supplies sat neatly arranged in a locked cabinet she had not noticed before. This was not abandonment. It was exile, chosen, deliberate. One afternoon, while Adewale was away, she wandered slightly farther than usual into a side corridor. A framed newspaper article lay face down on a console table, partially covered by dust. She did not intend to read it. Curiosity simply reached her before fear could stop it. The headline caught her breath. Akinwale Group expands operations across West Africa. CEO Adewale Akinwale declares, "Sustainable growth is our future." Her fingers trembled as she turned the page fully. There he was, younger, sharper, standing at a podium surrounded by men in suits. The same eyes, the same presence. Only then they burned with ambition instead of restraint. Ridwanat stepped back as if the paper might bite her. A billionaire. The realization struck her with force, not awe, but fear. She thought of her bare feet, her torn dress, her swollen belly. What business did she have under the same roof as a man like this? When Adewale returned, she was waiting in the living room, hands folded tightly in her lap. "You own all of this," she said quietly. He froze. For a moment, Ridwanat saw something raw cross his face, anger, resignation, perhaps even shame. Then it vanished, replaced by the familiar mask. "You weren't supposed to go there," he said. "I didn't mean to pry," she replied quickly. I needed to know who I was staying with." He studied her carefully as if assessing damage. "Yes," he said at last. "I own it." The admission hung between them. "Then why live like this?" she asked. Adewale turned away. "Because wealth does not insulate you from loss," he said. "It only gives you better walls to hide behind." He walked toward the window, staring out at the neglected grounds. "I built an empire," he continued, "and lost everything that mattered in the process." Ridwanat did not interrupt. "My wife and son died because I chose work over one more night at home," he said flatly. "I survived. They didn't." Her heart ached. This house was meant to be a place of laughter, he went on. Now it's a reminder. She stood slowly, keeping her distance. You punish yourself, she said gently. Adewale's shoulders stiffened. I deserve it. No, she replied. You're still alive. That must mean something. He turned sharply, eyes blazing. Life does not always mean purpose, he snapped. Ridwanat flinched, then steadied herself. Then maybe, she said, voice shaking but firm, you haven't found yours yet. The words landed like a challenge. Adewale said nothing. That evening the mood in the house shifted. He became quieter, more withdrawn, retreating into rooms he rarely used. Ridwanat sensed she had crossed an invisible line, but she also sensed that something inside him had been disturbed in a way that could not be undone. The following days passed in uneasy calm. Ridwanat continued her small routines, watering plants, resting, when her body demanded it, speaking softly to the child she carried. Adewale resumed his calls, his investigations. Pastor Elijah Ogunle's name surfaced repeatedly in hushed conversations. He's careful, one voice said over the phone. Well protected. Adewale's response was cold. No one is untouchable. Ridwanat overheard fragments without understanding their full weight. She only knew that danger had a scent and it was growing stronger. One night she woke suddenly, heart racing. She heard voices outside. Not within the house, but near the gate. She rose quietly and crept toward the window. Shadows moved beyond the fence. A car idled without headlights. Someone spoke her name. Ridwanat's breath caught. Before panic could take hold, Adewale was there, pulling her back from the window. Stay away from the glass, he said firmly. They found me, she whispered. They won't get in, he replied. How do you know? Because I won't let them. There was no hesitation in his voice. That night security doubled. Men appeared at the perimeter, silent, watchful. Adewale stood guard himself, refusing to sleep. Ridwanat watched him from the doorway. You don't owe me this, she said. He did not turn. I owe myself. Days later, the confrontation she feared did not come, but the threat lingered, coiled and waiting. Ridwanat's body began to struggle again. The stress took its toll. She grew dizzy, more often, tired more quickly. Adewale insisted on bringing a doctor discreetly to the mansion. The doctor's verdict was cautious. She needs rest, the man said. Less emotional strain. Adewale nodded, his jaw tight. That night, as Ridwanat lay resting, she spoke without looking at him. I don't belong here, she said. Your world is dangerous. He sat beside her, bed, hands clasped. Danger exists everywhere, he said. The difference is whether someone stands between you and it. She met his eyes. Why are you standing for me? She asked. Adewale searched for an answer he did not fully understand. Because someone once stood for me, he said slowly. And I failed them. Ridwanat reached out, resting her hand over his briefly. You haven't failed this child, she said. The contact startled him. He did not pull away. Outside, forces continued to move. Plans whispered, alliances tightened. Pastor Elijah prayed loudly in public, preaching morality while quietly demanding silence. Honorable Kunle Bamidele made calls, urging discretion. They believed Ridwanat was still a frightened girl with nowhere to hide. They were wrong. Inside the abandoned mansion, a man who had once ruled an empire was remembering who he used to be. And when Adewale Akinwale finally chose to step back into the light, the world that had cast Ridwanat aside would be forced to look at what it had done. But not yet. The storm was still gathering. The first sign that the outside world was closing in came quietly. Ridwanat noticed it in the way the birds stopped landing near the gate, in the tension that settled over the grounds like an unseen fog. She had learned to recognize danger, not by noise but by absence, by the sudden withdrawal of ordinary life. Adewale noticed it too. He stood longer at the windows, now his phone rarely far from his hand. Conversations that once ended quickly stretched into tense exchanges, his voice low-controlled, edged with command. "They're asking questions," he said one evening, ending a call and slipping the phone into his pocket. Ridwanat looked up from where she sat, sorting vegetables she had no energy to cook. "Who the people who prefer silence," he replied. She understood immediately. "They're looking for me," she said. "Yes." Her shoulders sagged, though she tried to straighten them again. "I knew this wouldn't last." Adawal studied her carefully. "What do you think they'll do if they find you?" Ridwanat hesitated. She had spent weeks avoiding that question. "They'll make me confess," she said finally. "Not the truth, their version of it. And—" the child she swallowed. "They'll say it was God's punishment." Adawale's jaw clenched. That night, headlights cut briefly through the trees beyond the gate. Ridwanat woke at the sound of gravel crunching under tires. She sat up, heart-pounding, listening. Voices. Men's voices. She moved instinctively toward the door, but it opened before she reached it. Adawal stood there, already dressed, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he said. "They're here, aren't they?" she whispered. "Yes." Fear surged through her, sharp and immediate. "Please don't send me out." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm not." From the balcony above the entrance, Adawale looked down as two men stood at the gate. They were well-dressed, confident, wearing the kind of smiles that carried warnings beneath politeness. "Mr. Akinwale," one called out. "We didn't expect to find you here." "You shouldn't expect to find anything on my property," Adawal replied coolly. The man chuckled. "We're not here for you. Just a girl, Ridwanat Lawal." Adawal did not react. "She wandered into trouble," the second man added. "We're here to take her back where she belongs." "She doesn't belong to you," Adawal said. Silence stretched. "Pastor Elijah is concerned," the first man said. "The community is uneasy. You understand how these things go." "I understand extortion when I hear it," Adawal replied. The smiles faded. "This is bigger than you think," the man warned. "You don't want to be associated with scandal." Adawale leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying clearly. "I built my life on confronting scandals," he said. "Yours included." The men exchanged glances. "We'll be back," one said tightly. "This isn't over." Adawal watched them leave without a word. When he returned inside, Ridwanat was waiting, her hands trembling, despite her effort to appear calm. "They know," she said. "They suspect," he corrected. "There's a difference." "What happens now?" Adawale did not answer immediately. He poured himself water, drank it slowly, then turned to her. "Now we prepare." Over the next days, the mansion transformed subtly. More men appeared, quiet and efficient. Cameras were checked, routes were mapped. Ridwanat watched from a distance, unease growing in her chest. "I never wanted this," she said one afternoon. "I never wanted to bring trouble to your door." Adawale stopped walking and turned to face her. "Trouble doesn't knock," he said. "It arrives whether you invite it or not." That night, Ridwanat could not sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the steady footsteps of guards outside her door. The safety felt heavy, like borrowed armor she was afraid to wear. She found Adawale in the study, surrounded by documents and screens. "You're doing all this because of me," she said softly. "I'm doing this because someone needs to be protected," he replied without looking up. "Why me?" He paused, then closed the laptop. "Because when you walked through that gate," he said, "you didn't ask for money. You asked for shelter. People who ask for shelter deserve answers." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Live," he said simply. "That's enough." The next morning, news traveled faster than truth. Whispers spread through the village that Ridwanat had been hiding with a powerful man, that she had exchanged her shame for comfort, that wealth had erased her sin. Women who once turned their backs now spat curses at her name. Pastor Elijah stood before his congregation, preaching loudly about morality, about fallen women who tempted good men. Honorable Kunle Bamidele sat in the front row, nodding gravely. "They're shaping the story," Ridwanat said when she overheard a radio broadcast, repeating the rumors. "They always do," Adewale replied. "It's easier than facing facts, but people will believe them." "Yes," he said, "until they don't." That afternoon, Ridwanat felt a sudden sharp pain and doubled over, gasping. Adewale was at her side instantly, his voice calm but urgent. "Breathe," he said. "Look at me." She clutched his arm. "I'm scared." "I know," he said. "You're not alone." The pain eased, but fear lingered. That night, Ridwanat stood at the window watching the dark stretch beyond the gate. "They won't stop," she said. "They'll keep coming." Adewale joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Neither will I," he said. She looked up at him, searching his face. "What if they destroy your name?" she asked. "Your company, everything you built." Adewale's gaze remained steady. "I lost everything that mattered once," he said. "I survived. I can survive again." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. Outside the mansion, Pastor Elijah made another call, his voice sharp with irritation. "She's still there," he said. "Handle it." Honorable Kunle's reply was curt. "We will, but carefully." They underestimated the man standing between them and the truth. Inside the abandoned mansion, a line had been drawn quietly, irrevocably. Ridwanat Lawal was no longer alone, and for the first time since she had been cast out, the people who hunted her would soon learn what it meant to knock on the wrong door. The days that followed were slower, almost deceptively calm. After the men left the gate and the tension settled into something quieter, the mansion returned to its strange rhythm, half guarded, half asleep. Ridwanat learned the sound of each footstep, the shift of the guards at dawn and dusk, the way Adewale's voice changed when he spoke into his phone late at night. Nothing was said openly, yet everything felt charged, as if the air itself was waiting. In that waiting, something unexpected began to happen. Healing did not arrive loudly. It slipped in through ordinary moments. Ridwanat started tending the garden. No one asked her to. The grounds were overgrown, the soil hard and neglected, but something about the sight of living things struggling for space called to her. With permission from one of the guards, she cleared a small patch near the veranda. Her movements were slow and careful, her breathing measured, but she persisted. Adewale watched from the doorway. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied, brushing dirt from her hands. "But I want to." He studied the fragile green shoots she had planted. "They won't survive." She smiled faintly. "Most things don't, not without care." He said nothing, but the next morning he ordered fresh soil and proper tools delivered without comment. Ridwanat noticed. She spent afternoons sitting in the shade, speaking softly to the child inside her. She told stories she remembered from her own childhood, simple tales of patience and courage of women who endured when the world turned its back. Sometimes she sang barely above a whisper. Adewale pretended not to hear. But he did. He found himself pausing in the corridor, listening. The sound unsettled him, not because it was sad, but because it was alive. The house had not held a lullaby in years. One evening, as Ridwanat rested on the veranda, Adewale joined her without announcement. He sat at a distance, hands folded, gaze fixed on the horizon. "You don't ask much," he said suddenly. She looked at him surprised. "What should I ask for?" "Anything," he replied. "Money, a place to stay, protection." She shook her head. Asking has never brought me good things. And yet he said quietly, "You still trust." She considered that. "I trust actions," she said, "not words." Something about the answer struck him. That night, Adewale unlocked a door he had sworn never to open. It was not the one at the end of the corridor, the one filled with ghosts, but a smaller room, beside his study. Inside were boxes untouched for years. He sat on the floor, opening them, slowly, methodically. Financial records, old photos, legal documents. He began preparing. Ridwanat sensed the shift even before she understood it. Adewale became more deliberate, more present. He asked questions about her health, her sleep, her fears. He listened without interrupting, without correcting. One afternoon, she noticed him watching her garden again. "Do you want to help?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "I don't know how." "Neither did I," she replied. He took the shovel awkwardly, his movements stiff, unused to manual work. They worked in silence at first. Then, without warning, Adewale laughed a short, surprised sound that startled both of them. "I haven't done this since I was a boy," he said. Ridwanat looked up at him, startled. "You laughed." He straightened, embarrassed. "Don't make a habit of pointing that out." She smiled. That evening, Ridwanat felt brave enough to ask a question she had been holding back. "You loved them very much," she said softly. "Your wife, your son." Adewale nodded once. "Yes." I think she continued carefully that loving again doesn't erase what you lost. He looked at her sharply. "It honors it." Silence followed. Long, heavy. "I don't know how to do that," he said finally. "You're already doing it," she replied, resting her hand over her belly. "You just don't see it yet." That night, Adewale dreamed for the first time in years. He dreamed of his son running through a garden, laughter echoing. He woke with tears on his face and did not wipe them away. The calm did not last. 2 days later, Ridwanat found a note slipped under the gate. No name, no signature. "You cannot hide forever." Her hands shook as she read it. She took it to Adewale immediately. "They're escalating," he said calmly, folding the paper. "As expected." "I don't want this to end in violence," she whispered. "It won't," he said, "if I can help it." "But what if the truth destroys everything?" she asked. "Your company, your reputation." Adewale met her gaze. "Then it wasn't worth protecting." That night, the pain returned stronger, sharper. Ridwanat cried out, collapsing onto the bed. Adewale rushed in panic, flashing across his controlled expression. "We're going to the hospital," he said. She grabbed his arm. "No, they'll see me. They already are," he replied. "Your health matters more." The doctor's assessment was tense but hopeful. "Stress," the doctor said quietly. "She needs peace." Adewale nodded. "She'll have it." On the drive back, Ridwanat stared out the window, tears sliding silently down her face. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Of running." Adewale reached over, resting his hand briefly over hers. "Then don't," he said. "Stand." She looked at him, fear and resolve colliding in her eyes. "Will you stand with me?" He answered without hesitation. "Yes." Far away, Pastor Elijah paced his study, anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. "She's becoming a problem." He snapped into the phone. "The man with her, he's dangerous." Honorable Kunle's reply was cold. "Then we end this before it reaches daylight." Inside the mansion, Ridwanat slept peacefully for the first time in days, unaware that the quiet she clung to was thinning. The seeds she had planted in the garden began to sprout small, fragile signs of life, pushing through hardened soil. Adewale stood beside them, hands in his pockets, watching. Some things he realized survived, not because the world was kind, but because someone chose to protect them. And soon, he would have to choose again, publicly, irrevocably. Because the story they were trying to bury was no longer willing to stay underground. The truth did not announce itself all at once. It revealed its edges, first sharp, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Adewale began his investigation, quietly, the way he had learned to do everything that mattered. He did not call journalists. He did not confront anyone directly. He reopened channels he had closed years ago and spoke to people who understood discretion as survival. "Start with the church," he said into his phone one morning. "I want records, transfers, meetings, anything that ties Pastor Elijah Ogunle to local officials." Ridwanat watched him from the veranda, unease tightening in her chest. She had sensed the shift days earlier, the way his calm had become focused, the way decisions fell from him with renewed authority. This was a different Adewale from the man who had offered her shelter. This was the one who had once built an empire. "You don't have to do this," she said when he joined her outside. "I don't want my life to become your war." He leaned against the railing, eyes on the horizon. "It already is," he said. "The difference is whether we pretend it isn't." She looked down at her hands. "What if the truth hurts more than the lie?" "It will," he replied, "but lies rot quietly. Truth burns, then heals." The first report arrived 2 days later. Adewale read it alone in his study, the door closed. When he emerged, his face was composed, but his eyes carried something heavier. "It's worse than I thought," he said. Ridwanat's heart skipped. "You found him." "Yes." He told her everything. Pastor Elijah Ogunle was not just a respected spiritual leader. He was a broker of silence, of influence, of fear. Donations from the church had been funneled into private accounts. Meetings with Honorable Kunle Bamidele appeared on records labeled Community Development. In exchange, accusations disappeared. Stories were buried. Girls who came forward were shamed into retreat. "And the baby?" Ridwanat asked, her voice barely audible. Adewale's jaw tightened. "There are others." The words struck like a blow. Ridwanat stood abruptly, the world tilting around her. Adewale reached for her, steadying her with practiced care. "I thought it was just me," she whispered. "I thought I was weak." "You were targeted," he said firmly. "That's not weakness." Tears streamed down her face, not for herself, but for the faces she imagined, unnamed and unheard. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" she asked. Adewale exhaled slowly. "Because he hid behind God, and men like Kunle hid behind him." That night, Ridwanat could not sleep. She sat at the window, watching darkness stretch across the grounds, feeling the weight of truth pressing down on her chest. For years, she had carried shame that was never hers. Now she carried something heavier, knowledge. In the village, the same knowledge was being carefully suffocated. Pastor Elijah preached louder than ever, his sermons filled with warnings about corruption, temptation, and false accusations. Honorable Kunle attended every service, nodding gravely, shaking hands with elders, reinforcing the image of stability. "They're nervous," Adewale said after listening to a recording sent by one of his contacts. "People raise their voices when they're afraid of being heard." Ridwanat wrapped her arms around herself. "They'll come after me harder." "Yes," he said, "which is why we don't move yet." "What are you waiting for? Certainty," he replied, "and timing." The waiting gnawed at her. Every day felt borrowed. Every knock at the gate sent her heart racing. She began to understand the cost of truth, not just the danger, but the patience it demanded. One afternoon, a message arrived that changed everything. A woman. Her name was Sade. She had seen a picture online, an old photo from a business article that included Adewale's name, and recognized the mansion in the background. She reached out cautiously, afraid of being dismissed, of being exposed. Adewale read her message twice, then called her immediately. Ridwanat listened from the doorway. "I'm not asking you to testify," Adewale said gently. "Not yet. I'm asking you to tell me what happened." The call lasted an hour. When it ended, Adewale did not speak for a long time. "She was 17, he said finally. They told her the same things. that she misunderstood, that she would destroy lives if she spoke. Ridwanat sank into a chair, her breath shallow. "How many?" she asked. Adawal shook his head. "Enough." That evening he made another call, this time to someone he had avoided since the accident years ago. "I need you," he said. "Not as a favor, as a duty." The reply was immediate. "Then it's serious." "Yes." Ridwanat sensed that a line had been crossed. "What happens now?" she asked. Adewale looked at her. Truly, looked at her as though weighing the cost of what he was about to say. "Now," he said, "we stop protecting their comfort." The rumors intensified almost immediately. By morning, radio hosts were speculating openly about Ridwanat's presence in the mansion. Headlines danced around the truth without touching it. Some framed her as a seductress, others as a pawn. None called her what she was, a victim. Ridwanat listened in silence, her face pale. "They're rewriting my life," she said. "They always do," Adewale replied, "until someone edits the story." That night the gate was tested again, not by men this time, but by messages, anonymous threats delivered through intermediaries, warnings disguised as advice. "Tell her to leave," one message read. "This will end badly." Ridwanat read it and laughed softly, a sound that startled Adewale. "I already left," she said. "They just refused to accept it." The stress began to show. She grew tired, easily dizzy if she stood too long. Adewale insisted she rest, monitoring her closely. "You're carrying more than one truth," he told her. "You don't have to carry them alone." She nodded, grateful but afraid. In the quiet hours before dawn, Ridwanat finally spoke the question she had been avoiding. "If this comes out," she said, "people will hate me more." Adewale did not hesitate. "Some will. And you?" she asked. He met her gaze steadily. "I will stand where I have stood from the beginning." She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. In the village, Pastor Elijah's calm was cracking. He made hurried calls, demanded reassurances, tightened his circle. Honorable Kunle urged caution, urging patience, urging control. "They don't have proof," Kunle said. Yet. Inside the mansion, proof was being assembled, piece by piece. Documents, testimonies, timelines. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a fire, waiting for oxygen, and when it finally met the open air, it would not ask permission before it spread. By the time the rumors turned vicious, Ridwanat understood that silence was no longer protection. It was a weapon being used against her. It began with a radio segment aired just after sunrise. The host spoke in a practiced tone of concern, never mentioning her name directly. Only a young woman hiding behind wealth and a powerful man shielding immorality. The words slid into homes with morning tea, into markets, into the mouths of people who needed someone to blame. Ridwanat listened from the veranda, her face drained of color. "They're turning me into a story," she said. "One where I'm always wrong." Adewale stood beside her, arms folded, jaw tight. "They're testing how much they can say without consequence, and if people believe them, they already do," he replied. "Belief is cheaper than truth." By midday, the gate became a gathering point. Not a mob yet, but clusters of villagers standing at a distance, whispering, pointing. Phones rose and fell. A few voices shouted insults, emboldened by the comfort of numbers. Ridwanat retreated inside her hands, trembling. "I can leave," she said, pacing. "If I go somewhere far, maybe this will die down." Adewale turned sharply. "No, I don't want this to become violent," she insisted. "I don't want blood on my conscience." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Leaving now would confirm everything they're saying. It would make you the villain they need." She stopped pacing, fear and anger colliding in her chest. "So what do I do?" she asked. "Stand here and let them tear me apart." "You stand," he said simply, "and I make sure they can't touch you." That afternoon, a new rumor surfaced, more dangerous than the last. A popular blog claimed Ridwanat had deliberately sought out Adewale, that she had trapped him with her pregnancy to secure a future. The implication spread quickly, feeding outrage with scandal. Ridwanat stared at the screen, nausea rising. "They're saying my child is a lie," she whispered. "That I planned all of this." Adewale reached for the device and shut it off. "This is what they do when they're cornered," he said. "They poison the well. People will never look at me the same," she said. He met her gaze. "People who choose lies were never safe witnesses to your life." By evening, the gathering at the gate had grown. Shouts carried across the grounds, angry, judgmental, hungry for spectacle. Security stood firm, silent, unmoved. A woman's voice cut through the noise. "Bring her out." Ridwanat flinched. Adewale moved toward the door. "Don't," she said quickly. "If you go out there, it will escalate." He paused. "If I don't, it will escalate anyway." He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. From the balcony, Ridwanat watched as Adewale approached the gate, his presence alone shifting the crowd's tone. Conversations faltered, phones lowered, even anger hesitated before him. "This is private property," Adewale said, his voice carrying without effort. "Disperse." A man near the front laughed nervously. "We just want the girl." "She is not yours to want," Adewale replied. "She's a disgrace," someone shouted. Adewale's gaze hardened. "Disgrace is hiding crimes behind morality." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "You think money makes you untouchable?" Another voice challenged. Adewale stepped closer to the gate. "No," he said. "Truth does." Silence followed, uneasy, brittle. "Leave," he said, "before this becomes something you can't take back." The crowd retreated slowly, grumbling, casting final looks of resentment over their shoulders. The gate closed behind them, the sound echoing like a verdict postponed. Inside, Ridwanat collapsed into a chair, shaking. "I don't recognize my life anymore," she said. Adewale knelt in front of her. "I do," he said. "It's the life people live when they threaten power." That night the pain returned, sharp, relentless. Ridwanat cried out, clutching her abdomen as fear surged anew. Adewale carried her to the bedroom, calling the doctor with practiced urgency. The diagnosis was stern. "She needs absolute rest," the doctor said. "Stress like this can trigger early complications." Adewale nodded, his face unreadable. When they were alone, Ridwanat stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her temples. "I'm hurting my baby," she whispered. "Because I won't disappear." "You're protecting your baby," Adewale corrected gently, "by refusing to accept a lie." She turned her head toward him. "Promise me something, anything. If this becomes too dangerous, don't choose me over yourself." Adewale's answer was immediate. "That's not a promise I can make." The following day, Adewale took his first public step in years. He requested a meeting with the board of his company. The news broke quickly. Analysts speculated. Journalists speculated louder. The absence that had defined him for so long was ending, and everyone wanted to know why. Ridwanat watched the announcement on television, her heart pounding. "You're stepping back into the light," she said. "Yes," Adewale replied, "and they'll follow." "What if they destroy you?" she asked. "They'll try," he said, "but they won't do it alone." Behind closed doors, Pastor Elijah paced furiously. "He's resurfacing," he snapped. "This is getting out of hand." Honorable Kunli's response was strained. "We need to slow this down," how Pastor Elijah demanded. Kunle hesitated. "We discredit her completely. Make her unrecognizable." The plan moved quickly. That evening, a fabricated audio clip surfaced online, claiming to capture Ridwanat admitting deception. It spread faster than the truth ever had. Ridwanat listened once, then shut her eyes. "I can't fight ghosts," she said. Adewale took her hands. "You don't have to." We'll fight facts. As night fell, the mansion stood under watch, calm on the surface, bracing beneath. Ridwanat slept fitfully, her dreams crowded with voices that refused to let her speak. Adewale remained awake, staring at the assembled evidence on his desk. Tomorrow, he knew, would demand more than preparation. It would demand exposure. And once the truth stepped into daylight, there would be no quiet corners left for anyone, least of all the people who had built their power on shadows. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and polished floors, clean, controlled, distant from the dirt roads Ridwanat knew too well. She sat stiffly in the back seat as the car pulled into the private entrance, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The city loomed around her in glass and steel, its rhythm faster, louder, indifferent. This world did not whisper judgments, it broadcast them. Adewale opened the door for her himself. "Stay close," he said quietly. "And don't rush." She nodded, her breath shallow. Every step felt borrowed. Inside, nurses greeted Adewale, by name, their smiles respectful, professional. Ridwanat noticed the way people straightened when he passed the way, questions softened into assumptions. She shrank beside him, painfully aware of the contrast, her simple dress, her swollen belly, the eyes that flicked toward her and then away. The doctor examined her carefully, speaking in calm tones meant to soothe. "The baby is stable," she said. "But the stress is dangerous. You need peace." Ridwanat laughed softly, a sound that surprised even her. "I don't know where to find that," she said. The doctor's gaze moved briefly to Adewale, then back to Ridwanat. "Then protect what you can," she replied. "Rest, eat, and stop carrying other people's shame." When they left the examination room, Ridwanat felt lighter physically and heavier everywhere else. In the corridor, she paused, watching families move past. Some laughed, some argued quietly, some cried. Life unfolded around her, ordinary and relentless, and she wondered where she fit within it. "I don't belong here," she said as they waited for the elevator. Adewale glanced at her. "Why? Because people like me don't get private entrances," she replied. "We wait, we beg, we explain. You're here because you need care," he said. "Not permission." The elevator doors opened, revealing a cluster of phones pointed unmistakably toward them. Ridwanat froze. A flash went off. Then another. "Mr. Akinwale," someone called. "Is she your partner? Is the pregnancy yours?" Ridwanat's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned instinctively, trying to shield her belly, her face burning. Adewale stepped forward, his presence filling the space. "No comments," he said firmly. "Step back." Security moved quickly, but the damage was done. The images were already traveling, cropped, captioned, interpreted. Back in the car, Ridwanat stared at her reflection in the tinted glass. "I never agreed to this," she whispered. "I know," Adewale replied. "I'm sorry." By the time they returned to the mansion, the story had taken on a life of its own. Headlines danced across screens. "Mystery woman seen with reclusive tycoon." "Secret pregnancy. Questions rise." Ridwan had read them in silence, each word cutting deeper than the last. "They've erased me," she said. "I'm just a rumor now." Adewale set the tablet aside. "Rumors collapse under evidence. But until then," she said, "they crush people." That night, Ridwanat couldn't eat. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house hum around her. She felt trapped between two worlds, one that had rejected her, and one that would never fully accept her. In the early hours, she rose quietly and packed a small bag. Adewale found her at the door. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I can't breathe here anymore." "This isn't running," he said. "This is pressure." She shook her head. "It's clarity. Every time I step into your world, the noise gets louder. They'll destroy you to get to me." He studied her face, searching for fear, for doubt. He found resolve instead. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I have always done things alone," she replied gently. "That's how I survived." He reached out, then stopped himself. "If you go," he said, "they'll say it confirms everything." "They already say everything," she replied. "At least this way the fire won't burn your house down." Adewale closed his eyes briefly, wrestling with a decision he had avoided. "Give me time," he said. "Just a little more." Ridwanat shook her head. "Time is what I don't have." She placed the bag by her feet and met his gaze. "You gave me safety when I had none," she said. "You listened when no one else would. That matters. But this—" She gestured vaguely to the screens lighting up the room. "This will destroy us both if we pretend it's normal." Silence settled between them, heavy with unsaid things. "I won't stop you," Adewale said at last. "But I won't abandon you either." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Then let me go, for I lose the courage." At dawn, Ridwanat left the mansion quietly, slipping through a side gate with the help of a guard who said nothing, asked nothing. The city swallowed her quickly crowded streets, anonymous faces, the merciful invisibility of being one among many. Adewale watched the security feed until her figure disappeared. The board meeting began 3 hours later. Adewale entered the room without apology. Executives looked up in surprise, then in something like relief. Cameras were ready. Questions waited. "I'm here," he said, taking his seat. "Let's begin." As discussions unfolded, messages flooded his phone, warnings, threats, reassurances. He ignored them all. Across the city, Ridwanat sat on a bench near a bus terminal, one hand resting over her belly, the other clutching her bag. The noise of engines and voices blurred together. She felt exposed, unprotected, and strangely free. In the village, Pastor Elijah smiled tightly as he listened to the news. "She ran," he said. "As expected." Honorable Kunle frowned. "Or, she's regrouping." Back in the boardroom, Adewale closed his folder and stood. "There is something I need to address," he said, "before this company continues." The room stilled. "I have been absent," he continued, "because I believed silence was safer than truth. I was wrong. Somewhere between the city and the road home." Ridwanat felt a sudden tightening in her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the bench, fear surging anew. And in 2 different places at the same moment, both of them understood. There would be no more quiet exits. The story had reached the point where it demanded to be told fully publicly, without shelter. And whatever came next would change everything. Ridwanat did not know how long she sat on the bench at the bus terminal. Time lost its shape when pain arrived without warning. It started as a tightening, then sharpened into something that stole the air from her lungs. She pressed both hands against her belly, breathing the way the doctor had taught her, slow, steady counting seconds that refused to behave. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, not now." People passed without noticing. A vendor shouted prices. A bus coughed to life. The world continued indifferent. When the pain eased enough for her to stand, Ridwanat made a decision she had avoided since leaving the mansion. She would go back to the village. It was the last place she wanted to be, and the only place that made sense. If the story was already being told about her, she would no longer run from it. She would stand where it began and let whatever came next come. The bus ride felt endless. Every bump in the road sent fear spiking through her body. She focused on the rhythm of the engine, on the weight of her child, on the memory of Adewale's voice telling her to stand. By the time the bus stopped at the edge of the village, dusk had settled. Familiar smells wrapped around her: smoke, earth, palm oil. The sound of voices rose from the center of the compound. There was a gathering. Her heart sank. Someone saw her first. "Look," a woman whispered. "She's back." The crowd parted slowly. not in welcome but in anticipation. Ridwanat stepped forward, her spine straight, despite the ache spreading through her back. She felt every eye on her body, on her belly, on the shame they believed she carried. Pastor Elijah Ogunle stood near the front Bible, in hand, his expression grave and composed. "Daughter," he said loudly for all to hear, "you have returned." Ridwanat did not bow her head. "I have," she said. Murmurs rippled. "We were praying for your soul," Pastor Elijah continued, "for your repentance." "For my silence," Ridwanat replied quietly. A few gasps escaped the crowd. "You fled instead of facing correction," he said, "and now rumors follow you. You must speak, confess, bring peace back to this community." Ridwanat's hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I will speak," she said, "but not the words you want." The murmurs grew louder. "You accuse this village," Pastor Elijah warned. "Be careful. I accuse no one," she said. "I am telling my truth." She looked around at women who once braided her hair, at men who had watched her grow up, at her mother, standing near the back, eyes wet, afraid. "I was told I misunderstood kindness," Ridwanat said, "that my body lied, that my shame was mine alone." Pastor Elijah stepped forward sharply. "This is not the place." "It is exactly the place," she interrupted. Her courage shocked even herself. "Because this is where you taught me to trust," she said, turning her gaze fully on him. "And this is where you took advantage of that trust." The crowd erupted. "Lies," someone shouted. Pastor Elijah raised his hands. "Enough. This girl is confused, hurt. She seeks attention." Ridwanat laughed softly, bitterly. "Attention is what you fear." Before he could respond, the sound of an engine cut through the noise. A black car rolled slowly into the compound. It stopped. The door opened. Adewale Akinwale stepped out. Silence fell as if the air itself had been pulled away. People stared, some in recognition, others in shock. Phones lifted. Whispers exploded. "That's him. The billionaire. What is he doing here?" Adewale walked forward, calmly, his gaze fixed on Ridwanat. "I told you not to do this alone," he said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to destroy you." He shook his head. "Truth doesn't destroy. Lies do." He turned to the crowd. "My name is Adewale Akinwale." He said, his voice steady, carrying easily. "I own the property you tried to surround. I also own the responsibility I avoided for too long." Pastor Elijah's face tightened. "This is not your concern. It became my concern when you tried to bury a crime under Scripture." Adewale replied. Gasps spread. "You accuse a man of God," Pastor Elijah demanded. "I present evidence," Adewale said. He gestured and a man stepped forward, handing him a folder. Adewale opened it deliberately. "Bank transfers from church accounts," he said. "Private meetings recorded. Statements from multiple women." The crowd shifted, restless. Pastor Elijah laughed sharply. "Fabrications, bought lies." Adewale's eyes hardened. "Then let the courts decide," he said. At that moment, Ridwanat cried out. Pain tore through her body, sudden and overwhelming. She doubled over, gasping. Adewale was at her side instantly. "She's in labor," someone shouted. Panic spread. Women rushed forward. Ridwanat clutched Adewale's arm, terror flooding her eyes. "I can't," she whispered. "Not here." "You can," he said firmly. "I'm here." An ambulance wailed in the distance, summoned quietly by Adewale's security moments earlier. As it arrived, Pastor Elijah tried to step back, but hands grabbed his sleeves. "Wait," someone said. "Answer her." Honorable Kunle Bamidele, who had stood silently until now, turned pale as police officers emerged from the vehicle behind the ambulance. "Honorable Kunle Bamidele," one officer said, "you are under investigation." Chaos erupted. As Ridwanat was lifted into the ambulance, she caught one last glimpse of her village. faces breaking beliefs cracking. Adewale climbed in beside her, holding her hand tightly. "You're not alone," he said again. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain alone, but from release. Behind them, sirens faded into the night, carrying with them the weight of a truth that had waited far too long to be spoken. And for the first time since Ridwanat had been cast out, the story was no longer being told about her. She was telling it herself. The ambulance lights painted the night in sharp flashes of red and white as it sped toward the city hospital. Ridwanat lay on the stretcher, her body trembling with each contraction. Her fingers locked tightly around Adewale's hand, as if letting go might send her drifting away. "Breathe," the paramedic instructed, calmly, slowly. "You're doing well." Ridwanat tried to focus on the voice, but her mind kept slipping back to the village, to the faces in the crowd, to the moment she had finally spoken the truth aloud. It felt unreal, like something that had happened to another person. Adewale leaned close, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "Stay with me," he said. "Look at me." She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. In them she saw no doubt, no hesitation, only presence. "I was so afraid," she whispered between breaths. "I thought I would die without ever being heard." "You were heard," he said firmly, "and you're not dying, you're bringing life." At the hospital, doctors and nurses moved quickly, efficiently. Ridwanat was rushed into the maternity ward, her name, called out her condition, assessed in clipped professional tones. Adewale stood just outside the delivery room, forced to release her hand at last. As the doors closed, a wave of helplessness hit him, familiar, brutal. For a moment, he was back in another hospital years ago, watching another door close, carrying another loss he had never forgiven himself for. He pressed his palms together, breathing slowly, grounding himself in the present. This time he murmured, "I'm not leaving." Hours passed. Inside, Ridwanat fought through pain that felt endless. Each contraction tore at her strength, but she pushed, fueled by something deeper than fear now, by defiance, by hope, by the knowledge that her child would not enter the world in silence. "You're strong," a nurse encouraged. One more push. Ridwanat screamed, not in despair but in release. Then suddenly, there was a cry. Thin, sharp, alive. Time seemed to stop. "It's a girl," the doctor announced with a smile. Ridwanat sobbed, laughter and tears blending together as they placed the baby against her chest. She stared down at the tiny face, scrunched and furious at the world, and felt something inside her finally loosen. "I didn't fail you," she whispered. "I stayed." Outside, when the news reached Adewale, his knees nearly gave way. He pressed a hand to the wall, eyes closing as a sound escaped him, half laugh, half prayer. A few minutes later, he was allowed inside. He approached the bed slowly, as though afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. Ridwanat looked up at him, her face pale but glowing, the baby nestled against her. "She's beautiful," he said hoarsely. Ridwanat smiled weakly. "She's stubborn." Adewale let out a quiet laugh, then carefully reached out his finger, brushing the baby's tiny hand. She curled her fingers around him instinctively. Something inside him broke open. "Hello," he whispered. "You're very brave." In the days that followed, the outside world erupted. News broke across the country. Not rumors, this time facts. Investigations were announced. Financial records leaked. More women came forward, their stories echoing Ridwanat's in painful detail. Pastor Elijah Ogunle was suspended, then arrested. Honorable Kunle Bamidele resigned under pressure, his carefully built image collapsing in real time. The village was forced to watch as the truth they had rejected stared back at them from every screen. Ridwanat stayed in the hospital longer than planned, her body needing time to recover from the strain. Adawal visited every day, sometimes staying long past visiting hours, sitting quietly beside her bed while she slept, the baby cradled safely nearby. One afternoon, her mother appeared at the door. Aisha Lawal looked smaller than Ridwanat remembered. Older. Her eyes filled with tears the moment she saw her daughter. "I didn't know how to protect you," Aisha whispered, "so I chose myself. I'm sorry." Ridwanat said nothing at first. She studied her mother's face, seeing fear, regret, love all tangled together. Finally she spoke. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness because the world changed," she said softly. "You ask because you changed." Aisha nodded, sobbing. "I did. I have." Ridwanat looked down at her daughter, then back up. "I won't close the door," she said, "but it will take time." Adewale watched from the corner, saying nothing, respecting the space grief required. When Ridwanat was discharged, she did not return to the village. Instead, Adewale brought her back to the mansion. Not as a hiding place this time, but as a beginning. The iron gate was opened wide. The overgrown garden was tended daily now, not just by Ridwanat, but by women at Adewale, quietly brought in others who had nowhere to go, who carried stories too heavy to hold alone. The mansion became something new. Not a fortress, not a prison, a refuge. Reporters tried to reach Ridwanat. She refused interviews. Her story was no longer something to be consumed, it was something to be lived. Adewale, however, stepped forward publicly. At a press conference packed with cameras, he spoke plainly. "I failed once by choosing silence," he said. "I will not fail again." When asked about Ridwanat, he answered carefully. "She is not a symbol," he said. "She is a woman who survived." One evening, weeks later, Ridwanat stood on the veranda rocking her daughter gently as the sun dipped low. Adewale joined her hands in his pockets. "She needs a name," he said. Ridwanat smiled. "I've chosen one." He waited. "Zara," she said. "It means light." Adewale nodded. Then she chose the right time to arrive. Ridwanat looked out at the garden, at the women talking softly nearby, at the life unfolding where silence once lived. "I didn't plan this future," she said, "but I'll fight for it." Adewale met her gaze. "You won't fight alone." For the first time, Ridwanat believed it not as hope, but as fact. Behind them, the world continued to shift, old powers crumbling, new truths rising. And at the center of it all stood a woman who had once been cast out, now standing firmly in the light, her child in her arms, her voice unbroken. The reckoning was not over yet, but the healing had begun. Healing, Ridwanat learned, did not mean safety. It meant exposure. The days after Zara's birth unfolded under a relentless spotlight. The country watched as investigations deepened, as names once spoken with reverence were dragged into courtrooms and interrogations. Evidence, multiplied bank statements, recorded meetings, testimonies that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Each revelation peeled back another layer of denial. And with every layer stripped away, resistance hardened. The mansion, now openly known as a refuge, received letters first, then calls, then threats. Some were anonymous, careless in their cruelty. Others were careful, precise, written in language meant to intimidate without incriminating. "For your own good, think of the child. Stop before more people get hurt." Adewale read them all. He logged every message, traced every number, forwarded copies to his legal team. He slept less, watched more, and carried the quiet vigilance of someone who understood how quickly momentum could turn into backlash. Ridwanat felt it too. She moved through the house, with Zara pressed against her chest, aware of every unfamiliar sound, every pause in conversation when she entered a room. The women who now lived there, some with bruises, still fading, some with babies of their own, looked to her with gratitude that felt heavier than praise. "You gave us courage," one of them said one evening. Ridwanat shook her head gently. "I just stopped running." But the truth was, harder stopping had made her a target. Adewale found her in the garden late one afternoon, standing still while Zara slept, her eyes unfocused. "You're thinking about leaving again," he said. She did not deny it. "I don't want this place to become a battlefield." "It already is," he replied. "The difference is whether we defend it." Ridwanat's jaw tightened. "What if defending it costs you everything?" Adewale met her gaze. "Then it will cost me less than silence did." That evening, news broke of a temporary injunction filed by a coalition of religious organizations, an attempt to halt the investigations, citing procedural violations and community destabilization. The language was clean, the intent was not. Adewale's legal team convened immediately. Phones rang, screens glowed, strategies overlapped. "They're trying to delay until public attention fades," one lawyer said. "They're trying to force a settlement," another added. "Quiet resolutions." Adewale listened, then spoke. "No settlements, no silence." The room stilled. "Then be prepared," the lead counsel warned. "They will escalate." They did. 2 nights later, as rain threatened but did not fall, a car idled near the gate long enough to be noticed. When security approached, it pulled away slowly, deliberately, a promise rather than a retreat. The following morning, a leaked document appeared online, falsely implicating the refuge in financial misconduct. Headlines returned with venom. Pundits speculated freely. The same voices that had once doubted Ridwanat now doubted the refuge itself. "They're trying to make us the story," Ridwanat said quietly. "They won't succeed," Adewale replied. But he knew better than to underestimate momentum. The pressure reached the women first. One packed her bags in the night, leaving a note of apology. Another asked to be relocated, fear etched into her voice. Adewale arranged safe housing without hesitation, but each departure felt like a small defeat. Ridwanat stood in the doorway that night, watching a car disappear down the road. "I don't blame her," she said. "Fear is honest." "Yes," Adewale agreed, "and so is courage." The call came at dawn. The hearing had been moved up. Emergency session. Public. "They want to corner you," Adewale's counsel said. "Force you to choose between exposure and restraint." Adewale ended the call and turned to Ridwanat. "I need to go," he said. "Today." She nodded. "I'll come." He hesitated. "It will be ugly." "So was silence," she replied. At the courthouse, the air vibrated with anticipation. Cameras lined the steps. Protesters gathered on both sides, some carrying placards demanding justice, others chanting condemnation. Ridwanat held Zara close, the baby's warmth steadying her breath. As they entered, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Inside, the hearing moved quickly, efficiently, with the cold choreography of power. Lawyers spoke. Motions were filed, objections raised and overruled. The injunction request hung in the balance like a loaded question. Then Adewale stood. "My name is Adewale Akinwale," he said, voice calm, carrying. "I am not here to negotiate comfort. I am here to present facts." He laid them out methodically. Timelines, transfers, witnesses, independent audits. Each point delivered, without flourish, without malice. The truth did not need decoration. When he finished, the judge turned to the opposing counsel. Response. The man rose confident. "We question the credibility of the so-called victim at the center of this." Ridwanat stood. The room shifted. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. "My credibility," she said steady, "was questioned long before I spoke." She told her story, not all of it. Not for spectacle, but enough. She spoke of trust, of manipulation, of being told that truth would destroy lives while lies were protected. She spoke of being cast out of choosing not to disappear. "And I am not the center," she finished. "I am one of many." The judge listened without interruption. When the ruling came, it was brief. The injunction was denied. Outside, the noise surged, cheers, shouts, the roar of a turning tide. Adewale exhaled slowly. the tension easing from his shoulders. Ridwanat closed her eyes, tears slipping free. But victory did not mean peace. As they descended the steps, a man broke through the crowd shouting accusations, rage twisting his face. Security intervened quickly, but the message was clear. This was not over. That night, back at the mansion, Ridwanat sat awake, Zara sleeping against her shoulder. Adewale joined her, setting a blanket around them both. "They'll keep trying," Ridwanat said. "Yes," he replied, "and we'll keep answering." She looked up at him. "What if the answer isn't enough?" Adewale considered that. "Then we become more." In the quiet that followed, Ridwanat understood the final shape of the fight ahead. It would not be won in a single ruling or arrest. It would be won by staying visible, by building something that could not be dismissed as a scandal. The refuge needed a future, and the future would demand a choice, one last stand, public and irreversible. Ridwanat rested her cheek against Zara's head and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she knew, would ask her to step forward again. Not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to be erased. The morning after, the court ruling arrived without celebration. Ridwanat woke before dawn, Zara warm against her chest, the mansion quiet in a way that felt watchful rather than peaceful. Birds stirred in the trees beyond the veranda, and the garden once neglected, now carefully tended, held the pale promise of a new day. She sat up slowly, mindful of her body, mindful of the child whose breath rose and fell in steady rhythm. Visibility had saved them. Visibility would now demand more. Adewale was already awake. She found him in the study, sleeves rolled up the table, covered with plans, not legal documents this time, but architectural drawings and schedules. He looked up as she entered, relief flickering across his face. "I was hoping you'd join me," he said. Ridwanat studied the papers. "This isn't defense," she said. "This is building." "Yes," he replied. "Defense keeps you alive. Building keeps you standing." They spoke quietly, deliberately. The refuge would no longer be an informal sanctuary hidden behind iron gates. It would become a registered foundation, transparent, audited, open to scrutiny. Medical partnerships, legal counseling, temporary housing, training programs. Not charity as spectacle, but systems that held. "The louder we are," Adewale said, "the fewer shadows they can use." By mid-morning, visitors arrived, not reporters, but women. Some came with babies wrapped tight against their backs. Others came with nothing but questions. Ridwanat met them at the gate, her presence steady, her voice gentle. "You're safe here," she told them. "And if you choose to leave later, we'll help you do that too." Safety, she had learned, was not ownership. It was choice. The first setback came before noon. A message circulated online, another attempt to fracture trust. It accused the foundation of exploiting trauma for publicity, of using women as symbols. The language was sharp, calculated to wound without proof. Ridwanat read it once and handed the phone back to Adewale. "We answer with structure," she said. "Not anger." He nodded. "We publish everything." They did. Budgets, oversight, independent boards, names of partners. Sunlight where secrecy once thrived. That afternoon, a call came from the hospital. Another woman, early labor, no transport. Ridwanat didn't hesitate. "Get the car." At the hospital, she held the woman's hand through fear and pain, speaking the words she had once needed to hear. Adewale waited outside, pacing, the old helplessness rising and falling as he reminded himself. This was not the past repeating, it was the present responding. When the baby cried, the sound carried through the corridor like a declaration. On the drive back, Ridwanat watched the city pass and felt something settle inside her. Not relief, not triumph, but resolve. That evening, Adewale made his final public move. He stepped in front of cameras, not to accuse, not to recount, but to commit.
"This foundation exists because silence failed," he said. "It will remain because truth requires maintenance." Questions followed about costs, risks, retaliation. He answered each without embellishment. When asked about Ridwan, he was precise.
She leads by lived understanding, he said. I support by infrastructure. That is our agreement. Later in the quiet of the veranda, Ridwanat asked him, "Are you afraid?" He considered it. "Yes," he said, "but I'm not confused." The retaliation came as promised. A late-night attempt to intimidate, a car too slow at the gate, a call that went silent. Security responded. Records were filed. Nothing escalated beyond threat. What escalated instead was attention. More women came forward. More institutions offered partnership. The refugee grew not in size alone, but in credibility. The village sent a delegation. Ridwanat met them beneath the mango tree at the edge of the grounds. Elders stood with folded hands. Her mother stood among them, eyes lowered. "We were wrong," one elder said. "We want to make amends." Ridwanat listened. She felt the familiar ache, the desire for apology, the memory of harm. "Amends aren't words," she said calmly. "They're actions." "What do you ask?" another elder pressed. "Stop protecting lies," Ridwanat replied. "Teach your daughters they are not disposable. And if you cannot do that, do not come here asking for absolution." Some nodded, some bristled. All heard her. Adewale watched from a distance, understanding this was not his ground to occupy. That night the mansion felt different again. Not guarded, not besieged, but alive. Laughter rose from the kitchen. Babies slept in borrowed cribs. The garden lights glowed softly, illuminating paths that had once led nowhere. Ridwanat stood by the railing. Zara nestled against her shoulder and breathed. "You're tired," Adewale said, joining her. "Yes," she replied, "but it's the good kind." He smiled faintly. "I remember that feeling." She turned to him. "You're still choosing this." "I am," he said. "Every day." She considered the words. "Then so am I." In the weeks that followed, the cases moved forward. Courts did what courts do, slowly, imperfectly, but forward. Names fell from pedestals. Others rose steadier for having learned. The refuge opened its doors officially on a clear morning. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just people arriving and being received. Ridwanat named the foundation herself, the Standing Light. Not because light banished darkness forever, but because it made standing possible. At sunset, as the first day closed, Ridwanat sat beneath the mango tree, with Zara asleep in her arms. Adewale stood beside her, hands in his pockets, the city breathing in the distance. "I used to think surviving was the end," Ridwanat said. "Now I think it's the beginning." Adewale nodded. "Survival teaches you how to live. Standing teaches you why." She smiled, small and sure. Behind them, the mansion, once a place of hiding, held its doors open, and in that openness, justice did not arrive as a miracle. It arrived as work chosen, shared, and sustained. For Ridwanat Lawal, cast out and told to disappear, the world had finally made space, not because it was kind, but because she refused to move. And this time she was not alone. Ridwanat Lawal's journey reminds us of a truth. Many people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. Injustice survives on silence, but healing begins the moment someone dares to speak. She was not saved by wealth, power, or luck. She was saved by the decision to stop shrinking herself for the comfort of others. When the world told her to disappear, she chose to stand. This story is not about a billionaire rescuing a poor girl. It is about a young woman who refused to carry shame that was never hers, and a man who learned that protection is not charity, it is responsibility. Ridwanat did not become strong because life was kind to her. She became strong because life was cruel, and she decided that cruelty would end with her. Her courage exposed the lies of those who hid behind religion, reputation, and authority, proving that power without integrity always collapses. There is a lesson here for anyone who has ever been judged, silenced, or pushed aside. You do not need permission to tell the truth. You do not need to be perfect to deserve dignity. And you do not need to be loud for your life to matter.
Sometimes the bravest act is simply refusing to disappear when the world expects you to.
Healing, as this story shows, is not instant. It is work. It is choosing visibility over safety, truth over comfort, and community over isolation. Justice does not always arrive as a dramatic victory. Often it comes quietly, through consistency, accountability, and the courage to keep standing even when fear remains. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect on it. Have you ever been judged unfairly or forced to carry a burden that was not yours? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you want to hear more stories about courage, justice, healing, and hope, stories that reflect real struggles and real strength, subscribe to the channel. Stay with us, share this story with someone who needs it, and let's keep standing together.